This edition of the Science Review is rather special. It comes to you from Arizona. We're at a conference, the Origins Initiative, put on by Arizona State University. Largely responsible for that is on my left, Lawrence Krauss. We'll get into that later. You've been watching possibly some of it on the web, and we'll be carrying it on the Science Network later. So this is a discussion among some of the people who've been here. On my far left is Richard Dawkins. Next to him, A.C. Grayling, Lawrence Krauss, as I said. On my right, Stephen Pinker and Brian Greene. We're going to go through a few issues that deal basically with science and society, science and social policy. And I was going to suggest as a beginning that next year is the 350th anniversary of the Royal Society. It's a major event, an enterprise that's been going on now essentially at the beginning of what would loosely be called the scientific revolution. And it's a manifestation to some extent of Francis Bacon's ideas. Bacon wrote this extraordinary utopian book called The New Atlantis, which, despite its flaws, had some wonderful ideas in it, one of which was that there were merchants of light on this island because their primary commodity that they were exchanging and seeking out was the light of understanding. So at some point next year, we'll be doing a meeting called, in the Beyond Belief series, Beyond Belief, the Merchants of Light, and it will be in the form of essentially a shareholders report about the state of this enterprise of science over this period. So I want to start by asking you, how are we doing? What are the upsides and the downsides from your own disciplines? What's your sense of science at this particular time when we have a president in the United States who says he wants to restore science to its rightful place on the US agenda, and the leader of the House here who also says that her agenda is 4 words: science, 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 and science. So this is a great opportunity for scientists to speak out about what they're thinking at this point. So who'd like to go first?
I will. It's a great opportunity. It's a great challenge. I mean, one of the reasons that it's become so important is we are recovering from a time when science was having extreme difficulties in terms of being the sound basis of public policy. 8 years in this country where it was really being ignored or censored or distorted. At the same time, and this is perhaps more relevant to the group that we have here, there are great challenges, again, in this country but in other places in the world, challenges to the notion of scientific rationality. And I think more than any time in perhaps the last century, we are at this threshold of conflict that and it's hard to know where it's going to go worldwide. So I think the scientific endeavor is doing fine. We have, as a discipline, suffered in this country and elsewhere because science was not being the basis of sound public policy, which it should be. It should inform public policy. No one wants scientists to be decision makers so much as to be able to have the results of empirical study be used by those who are empowered by the public to make decisions on their behalf. And we've suffered severely, and so that's what makes this so exciting. And it's a time of hope, but I think a great challenge because we suffered tremendously because of a lack of sound policy in the past.
Yeah. Now, it's no surprise, is it, before we get another response, it's no surprise, I should obviously make the point that you guys obviously all believe in this to the extent that you are public faces of science. You're public intellectuals, you're communicators. Richard, particularly on selfish gene evolution stories, but also on the God Delusion book and so on. Anthony Grayling, philosophy, communication of ideas about what is good, what is right, moral issues, and so on. Steve, last book, The Stuff of Thought, so very much interested in how we think. And Brian, the cosmos, the big stage. Your role in this is obviously important. So let's start at this end and pick up from where Lawrence started there and see what your sense is from your place on that. Unless Richard, do you want to?
I was just going to say, I thought we were talking about the last 350 years, not current policy in the
United
States.
Oh no, but you can you're absolutely the last 350 years. Okay. Do you want to actually go in now?
Well, I thought we decided on 2 different things. One was the last 350 years and then current policy. It sounds as though Lawrence jumped into part two rather than...
I thought he asked at the current time, but maybe you want to start,
Well,
you want to start this all over again?
No. You're all such nimble thinkers that will go between one and the other. I actually would make the case, I think I could at least try and make the case that there's something not dissimilar now to then. I mean, the 1660 was a time of great turmoil. There was just a beginnings in science. Hooke, Wren, Boyle, and so on were just beginning to meet. There were no coffee houses, if you'll recall, in England until 1650. Coffee houses in London in 1652, and if you read Pepys and John Evelyn, you find that all these mechanics and the virtuosi, like Wren, Hooke, Boyle, and so on, are meeting at these new places, and there's a kind of a coffee internet. There's a cognitively enhanced driving engine going on, bringing all these people together into a community, the kind of community of science that Bacon was advocating. I would suggest that after a lot of the disarray socially that's been going on recently, that the sort of sense of science now is not radically dissimilar. It's a great opportunity to do the same sort of thing. Well, Roger, that's the link I wanted to make.
It's quite a good point, because we just come out, or are in a period of turmoil. There's conflict in the worlds of a serious kind, which the US is deeply engaged in, and we've got this economic difficulty that we find now, just come out of a double presidency and two terms president who's been very inimical to science, and Lawrence is right about that. And there are some parallels with 1660. The Civil War period, the Commonwealth period, the restoration of the monarchy, and so on. So, there are these superficial analogies at the very least. But one thing one has to remember is that the foundation of the Royal Society was not just the origin of something, the beginning of something very important in the institutionalization of science as an important thing in society, but it was the end product of something, of 100 years of struggle between, on the one hand, the emerging empirical studies, and on the other, reactionary forces, in particular the church, that was made very anxious by some of the things that the new sciences were saying. And the fact that an institution could be set up in 1660 was the mark of a success. That there had been a victory of an intellectual kind at the end of that century, that had started with Copernicus and all the great changes there. So it's an important point to remember that it's a mark of a stage in a process which has been a longer and a richer one.
I was focusing on the notion of how do you build a community which is engaged with, sympathetic to, supportive of, and doing good science.
Well, so, I mean, obviously, there's one huge difference between now and then. The science has become such a community. That's what I think the people at this table try to do, is explain to the public how the scientific community works so successfully internationally together to change the world, and that's happened and will continue to happen regardless of the public perception of it.
Yeah, but let's Brian had a point.
Well, it's interesting. You began by asking, how have we done? And we've done really well. And you think back to Newton, he was trying to figure out the motion of everyday objects, from throwing a ball to the motion of the moon, and he did a really good job. And he did such a good job that it took us a long time before we were able to make the next dramatic steps. But we have. We've been able to understand how molecules work, how atoms work, subatomic particles. We've been able to go the other direction, figure out how neutron stars and black holes, entire galaxies, and the whole universe. We really have a fairly good understanding over a huge range of physical scales. That is a tremendous achievement, but it also sets up a challenge. We are now investigating realms that are so far from everyday experience that it really requires us to be a bridge from very unfamiliar territory, molecules, atoms, and particles, and the strange features of the quantum world and black holes and so on. We need to be the bridge so that the general public recognizes how important these studies are and how exciting it is, the wonder of science, the inspiration that you can get from the ability of this thing inside our heads to go so far beyond and really grasp the universe in a very deep way. So it's been a great time, 350 years, but the success also sets up a great challenge.
I strongly agree with that. I think that the scientific enterprise during the last 350 years is, without a doubt, the crowning achievement of the human species. It's just beyond parallel. It's been progressive, standing on the shoulders of giants. In my own field of biology, since Darwin, We now understand why we're here, we understand what life is all about, we understand what it's for. We don't understand in every detail how it works, but we know what it's here for. And post-Darwin, we no longer have to resort to superstition when faced with the complexity of life, the elegance of life, the strong illusion of design of life, which after all is a hugely persuasive delusion. Then after Darwin, staying within biology, molecular genetics, the achievement from 1953 onwards, has been a quite astounding achievement. The reduction of genetics to a branch of information technology. It's become a branch of computer science. The idea that every living creature carries within it a digital archive, a database of the way its ancestors lived. I mean, Darwin would have killed for such information. It would have been absolutely amazing to Darwin. What a tragedy that he's not here to share in it. I think that it is something we should be enormously proud of as a species. But I agree with Brian that it's also an enormous challenge for the future as well.
Yeah, Steve?
And of course, the culminating step in this progression is that we're turning the tools of science upon ourselves, understanding how the human brain works, how human societies and culture emerge from interactions among the intelligent organisms such as us. And I like to think that it's that final step of turning the microscope around and looking at us as humans that explains what's so special about science and why it's such a fragile, vulnerable enterprise. Namely, that there's much in the operation of the human brain that runs counter to the